Okay, cool. Hi everyone, I'm Niamh, and I'm here to talk to you all about Firebase on iOS. Apologies, I'm going to have to keep clicking back to my laptop that's not working. Oh, okay, cool. Is it working? Sweet. So, who actually am I and what do I do? So, I work as an Android and iOS developer, and it's one of the main reasons I wanted to do this talk, because it's given me quite a lot of insight into the differences between the two platforms, the sort of technologies that one uses over the other. And yeah, Firebase I find is lesser known in the iOS community, so I thought it'd be quite a good thing to bring to you all. As you can probably tell from my accent, I am from the UK, so slightly jet lagged, so apologies if I'm a bit slow from that. I've mostly worked for agencies over the last few years, so that has allowed me to work on quite a lot of different projects and clients, which is both a blessing and a curse at the same time, but it has highlighted a lot of different headaches that you can have in the app development process. So what sort of things are these headaches? So say if you're working on an app and your back end doesn't quite line up with what you need for the mobile side, it might be more optimized to the web. That's a common issue I have. Or your QA team is struggling to be able to test on a number of different devices, or you want to be able to see your crashes in a more understandable way. Firebase allows you to do all of these things and quite a lot more. So what actually is Firebase? I know they're actually a sponsor of this conference, so probably a lot of you have spoken to them, but in case you haven't, so Firebase originally started as a database solution, basically, for mobile and web developers. It was acquired by Google back in 2014, which has sort of accelerated the development of all the tools available and made it more well known as well. Google have also acquired Fabric quite recently, so you might have noticed something that you might have noticed with Firebase is that Crashlytics is starting to be brought into the same umbrella. I'm sure if you use Fabric, you start to get nagged now for switching over. So this has also allowed for that suite to become all in one place. So that's the aim of Firebase over the next few years, to become the one-stop place for app developers for everything that you need outside of your main development. So what are we actually going to be talking about today? So the plan is I'm going to run through the process of developing a really basic iOS app that can utilize a lot of the main features of Firebase. I'll show you snippets of code, screenshots, and talk through what we can do with each of those features. Obviously I won't have the time to go super deep into all of them, but hopefully it'll give you a good idea of everything that's available, and then at the end of the talk you'll know what sort of things you might be able to use in your own apps. So the app we're going to be making is basically a clone of the lunch train app that the Slack team have. So hands up who uses Slack? Pretty much everyone, I imagine. Cool, and who out of those people has come across or uses the lunch train app? A few, okay, cool. So for anyone that doesn't know, the lunch train app is basically a really simple app that runs inside of Slack that allows you to create lunch trains to certain venues. So say you wanted to go to your local pizzeria for lunch at work, you can create a lunch train to that place at a certain time, and other people in the Slack group can join that train, and then a notification is sent out to everyone just before the train's about to leave and where to meet. It's actually really useful, because often you get loads of threads on Slack of where everyone wants to go for lunch, and it's a pain. So, but handily, this is a really good app to clone that covers quite a lot of the main features of Firebase. And I'll also talk about the potential for future development of this app, and like what sort of extra features we might be able to add on top of what the Slack app provides as well. So we'll get straight into it. Probably one of the first things we sort of want to think about is knowing who our users are, or at least having an idea of even just their name. Or like for future development, if we want to maybe group our users or have like private groups, so you just join a randoms lunch train. I think this is one of my favourite features of Firebase, is it makes it so easy to get that authentication process set up and going. And then as well as be able to use multiple services, so you can use Google, Facebook, GitHub, email, You can also do anonymous sign-in. You can do magic link, so through the email, sort of similar thing to what Slack has. The Firebase team's also provided us with a pre-existing UI to use, so you don't have to do any of the faff of setting up all your text fields and doing all the validation on that, which is super cool. So in just a few lines of code and setting it up in the console, you just have to like flick a switch and choose all your different services. You're pretty much good to go, and you can have your users authenticated. So let's go into a bit more detail on the code of how to do this. So in terms of these few lines that we need to add, we first need to check whether the user is still already signed in when they launch the app. It's fairly simple. And then we can use the Firebase Authentication UI if they're not, and just launch that view controller. So this is all provided within a Cocoa pod on its own. Another benefit of Firebase is all of the different parts are provided in a pod. So you don't have to have the whole Firebase library in your app and clog it up. So you can just pick and choose each bit that you want. And that's pretty much it. Then the only thing you have to do then is just conform to the authentication delegate to handle what happens when you're done with that. And once you've done that, you result in this. So you just have this ready to go that has all the forms ready for you. For this example, I've just used Google and email to make our lives easier, but you can obviously, that stacks up. You can also use your own UI, so if you have your own authentication flow, because obviously this is fairly basic, if you want to have something that looks a bit nicer, you can do that dead easy. You just have to link up to the right calls within Firebase, and that handles that all for you as well. So, next one. So I briefly mentioned in the previous slide about something called anonymous sign-in. So this is basically login even. It's basically what allows your user to access your app without having to give over all their details straight away. So this is particularly useful, as sure as iOS developers, about the App Store guidelines. You can actually provide a basic level of access to your app without the user being locked out. What it actually does is it creates a sort of temporary user that just relates to that user's like login session. And then if that user decides after they've used a bit of the app to sign up, it'll automatically link everything that they've done into that new user that they create. So if they've done a bit of data manipulation, if you choose to allow them to do that, it automatically does that for you. So you don't have to do any of that, which is really cool. Another thing for the App Store guidelines is you can have what they call security rules on your data. So you can restrict certain users. So say if the user hasn't properly signed in, they can only read data and not actually write it. So you can get quite deep into that, and I'll have a slide later on about more examples on that. So now we have our users. So we've got a login. We can see them in the console as they log in, all sorted. We want to actually be able to handle like creating a train or like being able to see the lists of trains. So what Firebase uses for data management is something called the Cloud Firestore. So if you've used Firebase in the past, you might have come across the real-time database. They're fairly similar, but Cloud Firestore is a lot better at scaling, and it's much better for larger sets of data. They're both NoSQL solutions, so the Firestore is specifically set up with collections and documents. So you might have a collection of trains, and each train is a document in itself. You can nest these, you can get quite complex data structures. It's fairly similar to how JSON works, so it's not too hard to get used to. It's worth noting that Firestore is still in beta, so it depends on like how stable a solution that you want. If you're doing a fairly new or personal app, I definitely recommend the Firestore, and they do generally tend to encourage you to use it, as it is much better as you get bigger. The real-time database is quite limited once you start getting big. So the full feature set of the Firestore will become a bit more clear as I go through the next few slides. We'll dig a little bit into the code, and it should become a bit easier to understand how it all works. I find examples tend to be the best way of doing it. So the first feature we probably want to do is actually being able to create a train. So we want to be able to write data. So we'll go a bit into the code on this, but first, I always find it a lot easier within the console. So this is an example of what the Firestore console looks like, and I always find it easier to create the collections and documents that I'm probably going to be using, like create sort of dummy data. So for me, visually, being able to see what my data is going to look like and be able to mess around with the sort of structure that I'm going to have, what data types. This example is when there's quite a lot of trains, obviously, but it gets the point across. So once we've got this set up, we can sort of then get into our actual Swift code and start creating these objects and writing them to our database. So for each document, you sort of want to create a data model to match that. So we can just use a struct to do that. You just match it up, and then we want to be able to match the keys to the values as a dictionary, which is then what the write transaction uses in a minute. We also just want to add a quick method to translate this across for when we get the data from the Firestore as well, so that it's all there ready for us to use. So yeah, once that's done, so we have our model, we have the data object that matches up to our document. We want to actually start the write transaction. So in order to do that, first we need a reference to that trains collection that we used. So we have the Firestore, and then from that Firestore we can really easily just reference the trains. And then something I found quite hard to get my head around at first was that you create a new train reference. So you can sort of imagine this as an empty document that you make from that train collection reference. So you've created a new document, and then in your actual transaction, you simply just run, and within that you set the data for that reference as the dictionary value of the new train that you've created. So say you had the UI, they've put in all the fields, you've got a new object, you just set it as the new train.dictionary, and then it gives you a callback to actually handle what happens. So you might have the UI gives you a little success message or an error, depending on what happens. So that's it, that's all your writing done. So now we probably actually want to see, so say if I've created a new train and you're looking at the app, you actually want to be able to see that train that I've made. So luckily this is quite a similar concept in the way that, to think about it, how we write the data. So again, we need a reference to the trains collection, and we simply just create a listener on that collection. This is quite good for updating your UI and stuff like that, so it automatically updates, and if anyone adds anything, you don't need to deal with polling or anything like that, it does it for you. So yeah, here I've just done so got all the documents and then just mapped them into the correct data model, and then we can use those as we so wish, so whether you want to update your table view or however you end up having your data shown. This is a fairly bog standard example. You can get obviously a lot more complicated, but for this it works. So as I said, so if another user's creates a train, as you've got this listener pattern, this will automatically get called. So you're probably also starting to wonder, what if the user loses connection at any point in this? This is another great feature of Firebase in that it provides offline persistence for you. So basically what it does is it sort of holds a cached version of the Firestore on your phone, on your device. So it has a local version. So say if you're halfway through creating a train and you send that request and you lose connection as you're doing it, what will happen is your local version will get updated with that new value. But obviously you don't have the connection to update. Then as soon as the user gets connection again, it will automatically compare the two versions and then update on both sides. Also vice versa, so say you lose connection for a while and someone else creates a train, it'll automatically update for you as well. So this is really cool, so you don't have to think about it at all, it's just there for you from the get-go. Right, so as I mentioned earlier, we have the ability to have different rules on our database for security, or even for data formatting or anything like that. This is sort of the basic start for how we do it. So it's written in quite a JavaScripty way, and you do it within the console. So it's quite interactive. You don't have to deploy anything. It's just there, ready, waiting for you. You're very much encouraged to get a fairly basic setup done as soon as you start using it, generally. So you can have it so that it's just that if the user's authenticated, then they can only read and write data, for example. And that'll handle that straight away for you. So this is an example. I don't know how well you'll be able to read that, but I'll be sharing the slides after. It's basically an example I pulled straight back off the Firebase website, shamelessly, but it gives some really good examples of the different types of rules you can have. So in the first section, it's more about reading data. So we've got matching that trains collection, and you can have different rules for whether you want to get a single train or getting a whole batch. You can limit how many a user's allowed to get. Like, there's so many different examples that you can do. And you basically have these match statements, so it's sort of like regular expression sort of thinking of it. The second section, you've got where more internal rules on writing. So say you have different types of users, you might have an admin that can do more than a normal user. You might have different levels of users, or like if it's their own data, you might want to be able to do more on it. So I could probably talk a whole half an hour on this topic. Obviously don't really have the time, so I definitely recommend, if you're interested in this, there's some really good documentation on the Firebase website on how to get started. It can, as you can probably see, it can get quite complex. You can do some really cool stuff with it. So now our users can read and write data, so we can create a train, we can view the list of trains. This is sort of a basic UI that I made just to link it all up. We probably want to be able to actually join a train as well. So I'm not going to go into the code on this too much because it's almost identical to what we've already done. Basic idea though is that we would be updating that train object that we've got and the document to include a list of passengers. So this might be a collection in itself of documents. So then we want to have also a data model to reflect that in our Swift code. And then we just have the same sort of methods. We have a listener on the passenger list, and when you join the train, it'll update the existing train that you're in. And these will also update real time in the same way as the train does. So we've got a basic sort of MVP version of our app. However, the main feature we're missing compared to the Slack app is the ability to do the notifications. So in Slack, it just sends you a message by the Slack bot. But for us, we probably want to use push notifications. And again, luckily, Firebase provides a really easy way of getting started with this, especially as an iOS developer. It's all contained in the console. I mean, obviously you need to enable it for your bundle ID, do a couple of things in the app developer portal, but you just have to upload the relevant certificates to the console, enable it, and then you can start sending test notifications straight away. So there's a interface on the console for creating like whatever notification you want, sending it to certain demographics, certain areas of your app. It's one of the benefits of Firebase because it links to your analytics. You get a lot more data about your users, and you can really target these. Something I'll be talking about a bit more is that you can use A/B testing to test out these notifications. So say you've got two different types of notifications and you're not sure which one will get the most conversion rates or anything really, or like the most clicks, you can use the A/B testing built into Firebase to work out which one's best, and you can target these in any way you want. But as I said, I'll go into that in a bit more detail in a minute. So now we can actually send our notifications by pressing a button in the console. That's not so useful for our actual app. For this, this screenshot is just a general sort of idea of how the Cloud Functions work. Cloud Functions is basically a way of having snippets of code sat on the server that can be run in a number of ways, however you want, similar to lambdas and stuff like that. So they're written in Node.js, and in order to get set up with it, you just have to, it's all through the terminal, you just have a couple of commands to run, and it provides a nice interactive guide on getting it set up, generates all the files for you, and then you can get going in your JavaScript files writing the functions that you want. So, on Firebase, there's a few ways you can choose how to send your notifications. So you might want to send us a specific device ID, or like a group of devices, or you can subscribe a device to a topic. So say we want to have a certain topic that they subscribe to, you could have it as a settings list in your app, and different notifications that they want, you can define those by topics, then they can choose whether they want to subscribe to each one, and that just makes your life a lot easier. And then within your cloud functions, you can choose to send a notification to that topic. So we're going to use the latter as it seems to fit in with the use cases that we want, but you can have a play, you can do much more complicated things with your data management in order to have a more targeted way of sending these, but we don't really have the time to cover that. So going into the code a little bit on how to get started. So this is what you'd need to have in your iOS app. So just say when they launch the app, or within like a settings screen like I mentioned, you just literally just subscribe to the new trains topic. So what I'm going to do is just have an example notification. If someone creates a new train, you get a little ping saying, oh, this person's made a new train to this place at this time. This is another separate CocoaPod, so if you want to have messaging, you can have that dead easy. So yeah, once we've got the functions environment set up, we can start writing into our functions. So to start, it starts feeling quite similar to the Swift code that we've been writing. So this is just saying that we want to watch the trains collection and any new document. So that's the onCreate, and then the new value is just that data of that new train. So we might want to know the name of it, for example, or where it's going. Then we want to create the payload for the notification. So you can have things like the icon, the sound, body, text, all that sort of thing. You can customize this even further by having like the priority and what happens when they click on it. Then we simply just send this payload. And we've got the topic defined there. So we just say, send this payload to this topic, and then just log us out the result when we're done. We can then view this output from the Firebase console. So you can see whenever it's triggered, you can see all the data that you might need on that, the time it takes to run the function, that sort of thing. Then you can also go into your notifications bit and see all the data related to that, check that the data is linked up properly and that sort of thing. So yeah, that's the main sort of like MVP full version of the app. Like with the notifications, with the data management, reading and writing. So I'm going to talk about a few of the other extra things that we could add to the app to sort of enhance it, make maybe the product teams' lives more easier. Oh, I can't speak. And like QA's life easier. So another thing, so I mentioned earlier about A/B testing. There's also the option of remote config. So if you were in Jen's talk yesterday on A/B testing, this is sort of a fairly similar solution to some of the things she was talking about, where you can turn on and off certain features should you want, and you can see the full analytics of it. So say we wanted it, as the example in the screenshot, it's just changing the colour of something. You can set this up within your app and in the console. You can then, Firebase then gives you the tools to refine those groups. So say you want it, but you can go really deep into terms of like the sample size, what sort of behaviours you want to be able to analyse. And then once that experiment is running, it links into Firebase Analytics and Google Analytics automatically. So you get full deep down data on how it's performing. So say you're not too interested in like a certain click, you can see far more detail on that. It's really cool. And yeah, A/B testing is fairly new on iOS, so the Android version of this is a bit more fully fledged, so you can sort of see where the iOS version is going to be going in the next, probably quite quickly, given how fast they're moving with new things. So yeah, going on a sort of testing route, something that's also new on iOS is the test lab. So this is a way of being able to run your UI tests, say, or just your app, just to check that it runs all right on virtual or real devices. It is again super easy to get set up, and it really saves your QA potentially a lot of time of not, especially if you're a fairly small team and buying tons of devices and having different OS versions is really expensive. So this is a really useful solution. And then again, it's in the same console as everything else. So it's really easy to link all this, so you can get all the reports from all your tests, and you can get all the analytics linked into that, and it's all just in the same place, and it's just makes everyone's lives a bit easier. You don't have to have tons of different links in your bookmarks for all your different tools that you're using. So yeah, as I've been mentioning, obviously with Fabric's link up to Firebase is the use of Crashlytics. I'm sure probably quite a lot of you have used Crashlytics. It's now like Firebase Crashlytics, I think. So this is also, you can turn this on within the Firebase console. It's its own pod again, but you can also link it up to Google Analytics, as I said, so you just get more and more data, which is always a good thing, and it makes your product team happy, so that's always a benefit. So this is sort of the examples of the different data that you can get. So like revenue, demographics, retention, which is a really cool one. So you get full data on like how often your users are coming back to your app. Engagement, so you can have all the data to do with your notifications, whether they're clicking on stuff, are they clicking on your new content. But yeah, and then the revenue one to point out in particular is you can link in your ads as well. So Google Ads is within Firebase too, so you can have all this in the same place. So yeah, that's sort of a general sort of overview of what I feel is the main features of Firebase. There are quite a few more. They're announcing new ones all the time as well and improving so fast, it's brilliant. So some of the ones here, you've got Firebase Predictions, where we use machine learning to analyse how your users are behaving and sort of give you a report on what Firebase thinks they're going to be doing next. Firebase Storage, so you can have like your images and stuff stored on there. And recently announced is the Firebase in-app messaging. It sort of gives you a custom way of communicating with your users. So say you want to be able to sort of nag them to give you a review or anything really, or just give them a bit of a helping hand on certain things. There's some really good new documentation on that in particular. And of course there are more than this. But yeah, so that's pretty much it. The code for everything that I've done here is on GitHub. It's not completely finished because I'm still in the process of like writing this all up as a blog post series that's currently in progress. I've just finished part 2, part 3 is hopefully coming in the next couple of weeks. It basically is the same vein as this, but it goes into much more detail. So if you want to know the nitty-gritty of how exactly to get set up, or you're stuck at any stage, it's really useful. I've tried to make it as sort of as new to Firebase friendly as possible. So hopefully that'll be useful. And yeah, you can follow me on Twitter, because I'm going to share the links for those later today. You can always ask me any questions on there should you come across anything. Feel free to comment on the articles as well, because I don't know if I've missed anything. It's quite hard when you already know quite a lot about a subject to get that good beginner perspective. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah?
I have 2 questions. One,
yeah?
The document serializable protocol, does that piggyback on the Swift codable protocol? Do those match together? Or do you have to kind of write your own?
So I've not really experimented too much. I've mostly generally used the ones that's in the examples there. But to be honest, it's so customizable what you can do in terms of linking up your data. You can probably do that solution in quite a few different ways. So that was.
My other question
yeah.
regarding the rules, the security rules.
Mm-hmm.
I know I've used the real-time database before, and you write those on the back end. It looked like that was client-side code. Is that client-side or back-end code?
So the rules, you write them directly into the console. So it's server-side. So you don't need to have those anywhere. Anyone else? No? Cool. Yeah?
I have 2 questions as well. One was about migrating data from real-time to Firestore. Have you had experience doing that?
Honestly, no. I'm mostly just starting out like new projects, either with real-time database or Cloud Firestore. But I'm fairly certain there's some decent. You can probably ask the Firebase team.
Yeah. And the other question I had was in regards to the notifications.
Mm-hmm.
So the payload that you were creating, I'm wondering, how well it translates to actually like APS standards, like in terms of some of the keys that you were using there. Do you know about like how it actually translates when they do that?
So I think, yeah, this is the thing. I think this is sort of you send off that payload, and then Firebase organises how it then sends that off to Apple. So yeah, I don't have a huge amount of exposure on that, but it's a really good question. I have to look at that. Cool. Anyone else? Yeah.
On Sunday they did a pretty good job of doing a demonstration of Firestore.
Yeah.
It was pretty informative. Really.
Cool. Yeah. I meant to mention that. Cool. If that's it, if anyone has any questions that they think of after, feel free to come up to me or ping me on Twitter, whatever. But yeah, hope it was informative or useful.